flexible later on. All right. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to open up my own instance of the training machine. If you are, a couple options here, and we always recommend the best way to really participate in this training is if you have more than one monitor, because you can then put my screen up on one side and then you can pull up a monitor of your own and then launch your instance of the training VM. Now there'll be several there for you. Did you see the update to the email I sent out with that information?
Yes.
Okay, you're welcome to log into your instance and you can click around, follow me if you want. If you're more of an administrator, you can simply just sit back and sort of follow along, maybe take some notes. So it's one of those trainings where, it's up to you as far as how much participation that you want to be involved in. So I'm going to go ahead and log into my instance here. And if anybody has any questions on what we're doing here, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead and jump in. So what I thought I'd do today is very high level, go through step by step the components, the tools of the software, just to familiarize you with names and processes. And we'll do some basic setup, and we'll run some data and look at all the tools available to you. And if anything looks familiar, you're welcome to jump in and ask questions on, how do I do, this or that. On Wednesday, we'll talk more about mapping. We'll build some models, build a map out. For those of you who think you'll be participating in mapping, that's a good chance for you to get some hands-on with that. And then on Friday, what I usually recommend is we do a session where you host and maybe pull up your environment and take me through your processes, any questions you have about your particular situation. A lot of people usually have questions about error messages and what they see in the logs. Other people have questions about their maps and how they work. And then beyond that, you have hours to use so that you could take some time and gather your thoughts. And then in January, we can meet for further sessions that are specific, answering specific questions or taking you through specific setups there. Some people use the time to maybe, let's try to build out a new process. Other people use the time for looking at existing processes, and other people just use the time throughout the next year as well. If you just want to hold on to that time, and as things arise, we can meet. We can look at what the problem might be, what the new setup might be, and just go through it step by step. So it's very, very flexible as far as training is concerned. So today I am going to start with our 3 components that you're going to become familiar with today. Shortcut on your toolbar here. We have the Trading Partner Manager. We also have the ECS Management Console. Let's bring this down over here. You can grab that. And then we have Delta. Just briefly, the product was developed probably about 20 years ago, and it's been through a couple of acquisitions. At the moment, we are still, these products are still labeled under Liaison. They're actually an open text product. OpenText does actually own the software. We just haven't rebranded these. To be honest, OpenText is a very focused cloud corporation, and the software is just part of the acquisition. And myself and a smaller team basically manage the clients who are familiar with the product and have purchased services and support for that. So the way these three they interact with each other is that the trading partner manager, allows you to set up partner informations specific to the data that you'll be routing through the environment. In particular with EDI transactions, this is where we're going to record the interchange information, and the trading partner in turn integrates with the ECS management console. The management console is that interface which you use to build out your communication channels. So once we know who your partner is and what their IDs are and how to uniquely identify them within your environment, the next step is to handle communications, create those communication specific channels, and then link the two so we know how the data will be routed. And above and beyond that, if you need to transform the data so that it integrates well with your ERP system or any backend system there, we can utilize Delta, which is the translator, and Delta does as well integrate with these items, these two components here, because within the Delta map, you would assign the trading partner information when creating EDI transactions, so we know how to assign the interchange IDs. And then within the map, we can also specify how to route or deliver that data. You can even take a map and determine who the receiving partner is, and then leverage the information from that receiving partner to determine how it's delivered. So they all work in tandem with each other and may have various responsibilities depending on what you need to have happen. Above and beyond building maps here, you can create some custom code tables which you can use to update or cross-reference information, IDs, store numbers that you receive from the trading partner, and simply update them to a code that's relevant for your integration, your ERP side. With the management console, you can not only do you deal with channels and communications, but you also manage any sort of errors and logging of those errors. You can define those relationships and create alerts for yourself. And then with the trading partner manager here, we can actually create more information related to that partner, which can be stored here, although a lot of that's going to be stored in your ERP. But to start, I am going to go to File, New, and I'm just going to create a quick test partner. Also with the trading partner manager, this is where you would create a unique user per resource there who will be logging into this environment. And ideally, each one of you who logs into the ECS environment will have your own user account, because ECS keeps track of that. So as an administrator, you can go in here and determine who's modified what channel on what date. And that's very handy because, you know, I've had situations where there's been communication errors and suddenly something broke and the client says, well, as of this date, this doesn't work anymore. And I'm able to go back to the records here, look at the logs, see who is using or updated channels, and then communicate with them directly to determine, you know, what was changed, why did you change that, what prompted you to change that, and how can we correct that. So I'd recommend, if you haven't already done that, that's something you should do. And if you want, we can do that together on Friday or even down the road as one of your additional sessions. I'm going to create just a new partner record now, just for demonstration purposes. You can create templates. This is handy if you have a certain very specific format that you want to maintain for everyone your partners. It's rare, but it's useful in some cases. That then provides you a way to standardize how these are all set up. And so somebody new can come in and just use a template and know what they need to fill out. But it's not a common occurrence. It's just available to you if you want. The product itself is very EDI aware. So from day one, this was built on an EDI platform, taking into account all the requirements of that standard. So you see a lot of reference to X12, EDI. It takes into account, for example, upon receiving an EDI transaction, within the standard, you need to return an acknowledgement within 24 hours. That's built in, so you don't have to actually build a 997 transaction. That's done for you. This all sits on top of X12 dictionaries, so you don't have to worry about validating X12. The system does that for you. And then above and beyond that, we start to build on X12. We start to look at data files and supporting data files. XML came on the scene as a B2B document format probably about 15 years ago, and so we begin to integrate and incorporate function here to support XML. We have some basic database connectivity as well, and generally we can support formatted data transactions. Although we're not really developing this product much further down the road, we are supporting what we have and maybe a few bug fixes here and there. But as far as any new product support, if there's some sort of data format in the future that needs to be supported, you're likely going to have to go via another third-party product in order to do that. So, but I have to say, again, this has been around for about 20 years or so. It's very robust, and the people who've used it have continued to use it for all that time. There are some clients who actually have been on this product for that long, and it seems to work very well for them. But anyway, in reference to X12, this allows you then to lay down your X12 identifiers. And for those of you who are not familiar with X12, it is a standardized format that allows you to, let's see, where am I going here? Is it into, just jump here, demo. Let me try this on blue. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this .edi extension. What you're about to see is our proprietary X12 reader. Let me just put this down here to the side. This is EDI Notepad, and what it will do is it will take the raw X12, and X12 is basically a series of what we call segments. You can think of them as various record types. Each segment is denoted by these first 3 characters or so at the beginning. Each segment then has individual elements that are then separated by a ASCII character, and in turn it builds this builds out a transaction based on position. So the DTM second position is referred to as DTM02 or DTM02, some people say, and the actual transaction set itself are these segments here, and what you see here is an enveloping. So this allows for the transmission of data to go from the sender identified here to the receiver identified here, and then various timestamps and date and timestamps and dictionary version and control numbers. And the idea being is the control number is set here as to the beginning of the transmission. It is then closed here to confer that what you receive is complete. This goes way back to phone line modem transmissions. So X12 itself, then the EDI notepad then can take this X12 and manipulate it in various ways for a nicer presentation. And sometimes within the company, people like to install EDI notepad in various locations so they can take a .edi file and review it. You can modify it. You can even generate a functional acknowledgement. Let me see if I can get in here. There we go. And a functional acknowledgement is a transaction that is returned to a trading partner once a document's been sent that validates that in fact it was received by the recipient, and it validates as a compliant X12. So that is an X12 transaction, and that is what this information refers to. These qualifiers can vary. It can be, you'll see ZZ a lot, which basically means mutually defined between partners. This is your ID and this is my ID. 01 is a DUNS number, 07 is a phone number, and it goes on with a series of these that you can look up. I'm going to go to next, and this is where we can set we can point this trading partner to a particular channel that we may have set up prior. That channel then will be used to route this data upon creating a transaction that's meant to go to this partner. So this means if an 850 is sent, which is a purchase order, this channel can be used to return the 997, that acknowledgement we just looked at. Or if you want to take that 850, integrate it into your ERP, and then create an invoice from it, that invoice then can be returned to the trading partner using this channel. So this is for sending to the partner. I'm going to go ahead and edit this further, and we'll just do this for now. And I'm just going to briefly go through these tabs just to familiarize you with what to expect here. So this is the trading partner name, and this is going to be the type. Testing and production within an X12 exchange is significant because this will set certain flags within the EDI document that tells the receiver of the data that it was either a test file or production file. You can set it to new just to get going, but when you're actually exchanging data with an EDI trading partner, you want to make sure you're in the correct mode here for the partner. Then you'll see these here. They may or may not be used in your environment, but if you've noticed some things set here, these allow values to be set that for the most part are used to incorporate into the translator. So the translator then is aware of who this partner is, and if you have a map that's maybe supported by various trading partners, because you can have the same map that works for many more than one partner. The map will recognize who the sending partner is and the receiving partner is, and then you may want to configure certain flags here or certain IDs that can be incorporated into the map. For example, for this particular trading partner, X12-wise, they're known as ZZ qualifier with this particular ID. But as far as your ERP system, maybe you have SAP or you have Oracle database, that vendor is known by a completely different string of characters within that environment. So you can set those here so that upon translating their data, you can lay in the correct reference for that partner that relates to your environment. And then on the way out, it can flip it. It can recognize the fact that it's from a particular partner, and it can be set to this in return. So that's a nice way to manage So if you ever notice any data here, that's likely what it's used for. It can also maybe just be a reference here, because there's a few places you can just set certain references. You can set notes here. You can set an address for this partner, some basic contact information, things like that. You do have this account field, and this is useful for users, the user types that you would create for each other here. Let's see, I don't have, looks like that's not there unless I create it first, but had this been a user type account, you would see the ability here would be able to set your username, password, and then you can control the expiration date on that password and set any requirements related to that that are required by your company. But as far as a user and password for an outside account, there are rare instances where you can set up a process where that user logs into your network and to ECS and may deliver a file, for example. And this is just that way of validating that that user is authorized. This tab is specifically related to X12 data and allows certain segments, segment delimiters, element separators, etc., to be set. And there's some general information here regarding the type of acknowledgement that you can build. In the rare instance where a partner says, I don't want a 997 back, please don't send a 997 back, you can turn that off here by setting this to none. These preferences generally are used for a different version of EDI, different standard document type for mostly for EDIFACT type transactions. So depending if you're working with international transactions, this may not be related to any of the work you do. Under our security tab, if there's any exchanges via AS2, a standard by which you can encrypt and digitally sign transactions, you can set the appropriate certificates here. If there's an AS2 setup, something that you're not familiar with that you want to walk through, we can do that Friday, for example. We'll look through that, look at how that can be done. And here's the delivery. This is the mode, the default mode by which data is returned to the partner, but that can be overridden. You can override this by saying that certain data from a particular, with its particular identifier, a particular map, only the 997s, or whomever sent the data to begin with. You can use these as basis for determining how the data should be routed. You can then create an additional channel specifically for that process. So you're not absolutely committed to using this default configuration here, but it is helpful to just to be aware that you can override that here. And again, as you go through your own environment, you might see things that stand out and wonder what that was, and that's what that was. Then we have the identification tab. This allows you to create and record an array of different types of identifiers for this one partner. That can be simple X12 identifiers. This can be an HL7 identifier. That's for data that's exchanged, especially in medical fields. A URI that might be applied during XML transactions. It could be an AS2 identifier. It could be a MIME header. It could be you're receiving a transaction type, and you're now, rather than looking at the contents of the data, you're looking at the header of that data and being able to recognize who that sender is. And based on that, you can then start cross-referencing within any of the tables represented in this property sheet here. So as soon as we identify who the partner is, we know everything about the EDI structure, the security protocols, delivery, and in particular documents, and this should think of this as maps. So you can recognize based on an ID who the sender is and then which maps to execute for that sender. And this is a great way to lighten up the load of having to create multiple channels here representing multiple translations. One of the things that we recommend is simply set those translations up here. This is for the receipt of EDI documents, and you can then apply them here, as well for inbound and outbound transactions. All of these, a lot of these channels will be seen will have this history tab, which will give you a record of things as it was developed. In fact, if I hit OK here and then go back to my test partner, go to history, you can see just by creating this particular partner record, we have all this information that was updated. Again, very helpful in troubleshooting issues with communication. Something suddenly changed, something suddenly fails now. You can determine, what might have changed during the process. And again, there's some various other areas here I won't really get into. They're not used as much anymore. There is this watches tab that you could set an automatic watch to upon receipt of a particular transaction. You can then be notified of its receipt. So that's one way of doing it, but that's very trading partner specific, and use less, maybe in testing in a brand new partner that might be useful, but not so much. So that is the trading partner manager. Now, what I'd like to do before we proceed is sort of prepare for other demonstrations. And if you'd like to follow along and do this as yourself, then I would ask you to do the same on your side. What we're going to do is use the import tool. So you can take these partner records, export them, save them off as .tpr files, and move them around your environment. You could have separate environments, and one way to maintain the continuity of all these records is simply export them out and then import them onto another box. So we have some that are already created and ready for import. So I'm going to go to the Tools menu here in the Trading Partner Manager, Tools and Import. And then I'm going to go to the desktop. I'm going to go to Project Resources. And these are the two TPR records I'm going to import. So I'm going to start with this guy. You'll notice that it lays down the name of the TPR record here as the name of the partner. And then you can choose whichever folder you like. This structure here is customizable. You may have your own format there. For this exercise, we can just go with customers, except these are just key tables that are included and will be communicated to the new environment once you hit OK. Here's our property sheet. You can see a couple of pieces of data here that can be referenced in a map. We have no delivery set up, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you to, under the delivery tab, go ahead and choose the file output channel, this example one here that's already built in to these trainings here. And as far as 2, you can just put in, let's do test file .edi. We'll just do that for now. And then go ahead and hit OK. If anybody has any questions about that, don't hesitate to ask. You'll then see under the customers, that's where that was. We can set this up to either new, testing, production. Just FYI, a self-entry is unique to represent your particular company. So you as the point of reference would be the self, and that is available sort of as a default setting if you wanted to do that. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and do the second import.
Mark, where did you
Yes.
put the EDI extension? On which tab?
Here in the delivery.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. You know, one thing you can even do, which is kind of nifty, is you can actually pull from data elements during the transactioning of the data. Each piece of data that routes through ECS has a batch ID. And this is something you may already have in place there is I'm going to use this $ as a way to tokenize what I'm going to represent here with an open paren. I'm going to do batch dash ID all lowercase and then close paren. So this is a token, built-in token that will grab that unique ID that's assigned to every transaction. So that's a nice way of giving yourself a unique identifier for every transaction that routes through this particular process. I'm going to use an underscore here, and then we have test file. Sort of a nice start if you want to do a little advanced work here. And then hit OK. That's optional. I'll show you what that will look like down the road there, but you don't have to do that if you don't want. But let's go ahead and bring in the other trading partner. We're going to go to Tools, Import. This is Wiki Toys. Double click. Again, under Customers, Accept. Hit OK. As common practice, what I normally do when I do this is just go through every tab, click on every tab, just to make sure, just to confirm that the information that I need is there. And it allows me to, sometimes if you do this too fast, you miss something. So I just physically go through, touch each tab. And again, for delivery, we'll go through to the file output channel, that example, and we'll do another, let's call it test2.edi, something along those lines. That's a simple hard-coded name, and then our ID, confirming that's in documents. There's some good information already built in, some address, and then hit OK. So now I have two partner records that we can assign to a map in a bit. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this guy and step into the management console now. As far as process is concerned, a lot of the times when you're onboarding a new partner, you'll just get a package of information from the trading partner. As far as rough steps, you know, I would say the first step is to get that partner record updated with the IDs, and if they don't send you all the IDs, you know, confirm with them what those are. Is there a test? Is there a production? Get your ID set up. The next step would take me here to the management console is to communicate, is to test communications, make sure I have the documentation in place, that I know how we're going to be exchanging, making sure they have my information so they know how they're going to be communicating with me. So at the management console, then I'm going to blow this up here so that we can get a better look. These channels here represent the configurations for moving data into the ECS environment and out of the ECS environment. I try to stay away from inbound data and outbound data because to send something out via translation, you need to bring raw data into the ECS environment first, then assign a translation event to it so that the data can be routed out. Output channels are simply where those channels that allow you to push data out to a trading partner, out from the ECS environment. So sometimes for outbound data, you're simply taking some information that you receive here and pushing it straight out, not even translated. An event rule represents some sort of event or task that you want to assign to the piece of data, such as upon receipt, do you want to forward that on? Do you want to translate that on? How do you want to act on that data, if at all, upon receiving it into the ECS environment? And you'll see here, I'll expand input channels and output channels. Let me close these up here. We do have a sample. You saw this earlier in the Trading Partner Manager when we assigned the delivery. The file output channel here, if you double click, that's going to give you a good overview on how these typically are set up. You'll have a general page which allows you to identify the channel. Naming convention here is something that you'll establish locally, and you probably already have a way to identify certain processes or processes that are tied to certain partners there. You have a description here, just a free-form text to describe what you might need to know in order to refer back to this channel. What I do a lot of the times is if a channel requires an account, a username and password, I'll put the password here, sort of as a reference back to it. Then you have some sort of directory structure, whether it's local in this file, in the file system, or it could be an account set up for an FTP host, or an HTTP host, or various communication standards represented here, represented by the path and account used, and then a lot of the times you have information here related to how to handle duplicates and such. Pipeline stage is an area within the processing of the data where you can take that piece of data and tweak it on the fly. This is a very customized little piece of little tool within the product itself. It does allow you to manipulate data that you've received from the trading partner. So you want to be careful on how you use this. It's generally used as workarounds to accommodate integration on your side. A lot of the times a partner might send a particular character set or a character that's not compliant, or a character that needs to be substituted. You can replace strings. You can take a secure file and decode it. You can take zip files and unzip them. So just various little tweaks to the data upon receipt. Once this is done, then the file itself gets integrated into our database. So the change occurs, and then the data gets written to the ECS database. So it's as if the change, you wouldn't be aware that the change had occurred unless you were aware of a pipeline stage that has been applied there. So this is a place to look if you're seeing something odd between what the sender says they're sending versus what you're receiving. It could be something that was set up years ago to make a swap here. Very helpful tool. It's also good for input. Any data that comes in as well, any data that goes out, you can tweak that data accordingly. Then you'll have a scheduling tab to set the schedule for which the periods of time to make those communications happen. You have this event rule tab. We'll come back to that. Then you have some routing, a routing tool here that is usually used in tandem with a customer service who might assist you in adjusting how things are prioritized. And that usually comes with the increase in volume in data. Once partner has this installed and uses it for many years, it may get to a point where things need to be adjusted, and we can help with that. We can also help with identifying when it might be time to add another node so that you have a whole other server working in tandem with this to manage data. And then we have that history tab again. It identifies when the structure was created, manipulated, adjusted. And then here's where you configure how you want to log communications with the particular host. This simply gives you a record of the communication itself. By default, only failed sessions will be logged. You can set this to always, but then I always recommend you do return it back here, so you don't fill up those logs too much. This is helpful if you're just starting with a new partner and you want to test with them and see how those initial communications go. So I'm going to go to hit cancel here, and let's go through this step if you like here and create a similar input channel, similar to this output channel. We're going to go to the same location, and we're going to create we're going to point to the input side of this. So if you'd like, you can go to this file here, and you can even select this string and just Control-C on your keyboard should do it, if I recall, and then go to your file input channel here, right click, create a new file input channel, and we can just call this demo if you like. Here's our name. The directory we're pointing to, we can just Control-V, lay that path right there, but instead of output, this will be, let's get this in. And to confirm that I got that name correct, we can go out here, and this is a nice tool. If you hit the checkbox, this will confirm whether or not this particular directory is accessible to ECS. And sometimes things get moved around behind the scenes. Somebody decides to restructure folders, and then something breaks, and you're wondering, why doesn't this work anymore? One of the first things I do is when I open a file input channel is I hit this button to make sure, are we still pointing to the right place? Because that'll save a lot of time, a lot of headache. As far as file path or file pattern, this is just going to identify the name of the file to be retrieved, and you can hard code, a specific file name that you anticipate will always exist. But wildcarding is recommended because that way you can account for all the variations of a particular file name, especially if it includes timestamps or the PO number, any variations. So this will, using this star here, will capture all files within the input channel. You're also welcome to specify maybe the file extension, or a combination of things. So star underscore PO will capture anything with this prefix, and then underscore star will capture anything with particular suffix. So all sorts of variations here, and you've probably, again, seen this in your own environment. But for now, let's just do star. So we'll be picking up anything that we drop there in that input channel. But we might want to play with this for a little bit, a couple instances. So come down here and take this checkbox off. Let's not reject duplicates for now. Then we're going to go to, this is walk across pipeline, content type. One thing I do want to point out here, just a note, is ECS recognizes X12 data when the file extension is .edi. However, a lot of trading partners will send X12 data within a file type of a different extension. .txt, .dat are very common. If that's the case, if they are sending X12 data that's not labeled as .edi with a .edi extension, always come to the content type and explicitly identify the data on that channel as X12. Because ECS does a lot of cross-referencing under the hood based on EDI enveloping, walking that trading partner record. But if it doesn't know to identify this to begin with, then all of this cross-referencing goes away. So you always want to make sure that this is in place. And if in fact you're receiving data and it's not behaving correctly, come back in here and double check. This is a good place to go. For disposition, go ahead and under the disposition tab, click the delete. There's various other options here, but delete is going to be the most common here. Scheduling, go ahead and take this box off here. We're going to do this manually so we can really control the process. The automatic processing works really well if the directories are on the same server where ECS is installed. But if you have to work across the network, if you have to create a share locally that's pointing across the network, you're going to run into problems with this automatic processing. So at that point, you'd want to create a specific schedule, fixed interval of some sort in order to pull that data in. Just sort of a note there. Event rule. This is where we would set a translation event, for example, and we'll come back later and do that. But this is just to let you know, this is we're going to prepare later an event for this particular process. Then we talked about routing, how that happens, usually working with support to create prioritizing of processes. Identification, this allows you to control where to look within the document, because we've had some unique situations where we want to supersede the idea of cross-referencing X12 identifiers within Trading Partner Manager. Maybe we want to supersede that and actually look in the header in a particular case. So that allows us to bring that up in priority here. But again, very specific circumstance and not likely used in most cases. And then again, we have history and then your session logging settings. I think for session logging, let's do always so we can see what those look like. And then when you're done, hit OK. And immediately you see this drop here. So we have a file input channel and a file output channel. They're ready to go. We're going to install a map in a bit and run some data through. But before we get there, I just want to touch on a couple other things. Again, within the channel settings, you have an array of communication standards represented here, all related to typical B2B exchanges and common methods of routing data, each with their own unique settings, but overall very similar to what we just looked at. And fortunately, in your case, you will likely have examples already in place. And if that's so, that gives you a start, sort of a step up, because you can take any existing channel that you have, you can right click and you can duplicate it. And so you can see this little one here represents this duplicate. Then you can go in here and tweak your settings. So you have a foundation to work with. Tweak your settings to customize it to your particular situation, and then you can go on your way. Of course, you can always also delete a channel, but you also can disable a channel. And sometimes it's better just to disable the activity on that channel rather than delete it altogether, in case you need to get back to it. You can delete a channel here, but it's still represented in the database under the hood, so that if you run any reports or anything, you're never going to lose data that came through a channel that you've subsequently deleted. So you don't have to worry about that, in other words. Couple other things we want to look at is under nodes, this just simply represents the number of ECS servers that are linked to or sitting on top of the SQL Server database. You can have more than one node, and that allows you to do a lot of load balancing. It allows for a hot failover in case when CPU on one side goes down, you can pick it up on another side. Gateways allows you to, this is where an ECS, the ECS proxy is represented. Some people have that installed in the DMZ to manage all the actual points of communication. ECS then reaches out to that proxy and retrieves that information. It's highly dynamic and very useful in certain environments that require that level of security. A pool is just a number or a combination of nodes. If you have more than one instance here, you may want to represent those instances in various pools that then can be applied to certain channels. So certain channels work on one pool or another pool or both pools or neither of those. So it's just a reference there. These listeners, this can vary depending on your version of ECS. Every version will have HTTP though. This is your ECS web service listener. This is where ECS communicates with the services here. You will also have a representation of other ports that are being listened on for HTTP communications. For any of those AS2 or web service type of communications, they also are represented here. Management is where you would go to set up any sorts of alerts. So if you can anticipate an issue, you can then represent the issue here and then be notified if that issue occurs again in the future. So that's something that you'll definitely want to have set up in order to make this as manageable as possible. This projects area just is a workspace to allow you to combine a set of any channels you may have into a sort of an easy reference. So rather than having to click through every channel and try to look for what your particular process, you can represent them here in their own little subdirectory. You also have this search field, and if you name a channel by the trading partner name, for example, then you just type in your trading partner name here and click channels, and it will simply display all of those named channels. So this is a great quick search tool, especially if you have lots of channels and you're just trying to rummage through and find what you're looking for. Security groups. This configuration allows you to set a subset of users, and users being a user here within the trading partner manager. And this way you can assign privileges to particular users or groups of users, so they have access to certain things and not others. And then trading partners, you have here within ECS Management Console itself a representation of, get rid of this, it's still filtering, of the partner records that we just set up in this tool. So you have that same bits of information represented here. So we're going to move to mapping real quick. We're going to install a map. We're going to come back here do some configurations that will then provide us some data then that we can play with some additional tools here. So I'm going to minimize this for now and this. Any questions on anything up to now that we talked about? All right. So I'm going to move over here to Delta. Delta is the tool that allows you to create, manage translation maps. These maps are simply used to take data that you receive from your trading partner and transform it into a format that allows you to most likely integrate it into your backend system. So let's open up a map right away so we can see what that looks like. Here in this left pane, you have a representation of a couple of directory structures. Student projects here, these are partial projects that can be useful in walking through a project yourself if that's something that you find is useful to do. But I'm going to go to the instructor group, which is a representation of the same project, but here they're completed. So under the instructor group, this is 2 Delta mapping demo. If I expand that, you can see a resources and a samples directory. Those don't contain any file types that are readable by Delta, so you're not going to see a lot going on here, but you do see these 3 file types. And here is a .dtm file. This is a Delta translation map. Then you see the 2 .bom files. These are business object models. So these represent a structure, how Delta interprets the structure of your data. Then we take these 2 structures, one for the input, one for the resulting output. We combine them to create the maps. You're welcome then to double click on this .dtm file. You can also see the icons, how they're represented here. And immediately this opens up into this workspace. Above is the rule set representing how the behavior in executing the translation. Down below on the left and right, you have a representation of the data. Now, if I want to get into any of these models, there is this little button here in the corner of this little bar. So if I want to open the data file model, I can click here, and that's represented here under this tab. And this is a simple hierarchical relationship between the file object itself, the bucket, which contains the first record represented here by this object, and then these are the fields that are represented within that record type. The header record can contain multiple detail records. So if this represents then the fields within those detail records. And I'm going to go here real quick and show you what that refers to. So here this is our file. Here is a header record. Here is our detail records. Here are the fields separated by commas within. And that's what we see here. Here is our data file, which contains header records, detail records, and then the individual fields within. We can come back to the map, go to a target model, open that guy up, and here's how the X12 is represented. Now here you're going to see something interesting because we have these X12 dictionaries upon which all this sits. You're not just looking at the segments that are used in this example, you're going to see a representation of every segment and every element that's available under this particular dictionary. And this is the 3050 dictionary. That's an old one. You could probably be looking at 4010s or 5010s now, but so rather than having to create anything from scratch, if you did need to extend this model to represent additional data that's being sent, you can simply go to the particular segment that you need to add, simply choose it. It is making a note here that this is in fact impacting this particular map. The reason it points this out is that you can have this map, this model, 850, it's rather generic. It could be used as the basis for other maps. So more than one map can be impacted here. And the general rule is you can add more segments, but I would resist removing segments because that's where you're going to break things. So this is just confirming that yes, I understand that this is impacting this particular map. But once I check the segment, you're going to want to make sure you get down in here and expand. Make sure you catch the elements, each one of these represented, and make sure there aren't any others that need to be captured as well. Any change you make here, you're going to notice this little asterisk on the tab. That just means you haven't saved any edits yet you've made. So you can quickly do that, and then you're good to go. So I can pop between all of these. Sometimes I do, because I need to reference. Sometimes what I do is I know that this is the PO header is the source model, so I put that tab on this side of the map. Here's the translation rule set itself, and then I know the targets on this side. Just for me, that's how I like to lay it out so that I can easily get to where I need to be, and it's all sort of self-explanatory. Let's go here to the mapping, the rule set itself. You notice I can make some adjustments here. A lot of the times, once I have a working map and I just need to make tweaks, I'll go to the toolbar and use this view just to open this up as much as possible. Again, I have access here to my models, and here's my rule set, much more workspace then to work within. What you see on the left then is a representation of the source node that is used to prompt the execution of the rule to the right. Now you can see to the left, it looks rather clean. You can see these are all the same nodes at the header level, and these are all the same nodes at the detail level. Where it gets a little more complex is on the target side, because you can see here various values represented alongside each element. Now, if I select the BEG01, the rule here has it set that the 00 is hard-coded. It's a string. It's within single quotes. That can be double quotes, whatever is consistent. You know, it doesn't matter here. Same behaves the same. So it's a string, hard-coded string set here on this particular rule. Whereas here, you'll notice there are no quotation marks around PO number. That will infer that PO number is actually a field representation on the source side, which you can see here. Now at a glance, you can also see these little green squares sprinkled throughout. Those represent variables. Those are objects that I create from scratch that I insert into the map itself. And to insert, I can right-click and insert a rule. I can insert a comment. A comment then is represented by this bar here. And these are nice to add in because it gives you not only some sort of design, some sort of architecture to a map, it also gives you an ability to label certain areas appropriately. And these are helpful for new users. And these variables that are inserted, they simply allow me to manipulate data to add additional elements to the map. In this case, I'm creating a count so that I can count the number of detail records that I'm creating and assign each record its own numerical character. And here we have another variable. All this is doing is it's taking the total and it's adding to it quantity times unit price in order to create a total order amount, which will be assigned later on. Yes.
A question. Is this variable being visible for all of the levels on the map, or for example, as this is created inside of the A50PO1, is it only going to be visible for that segment, or how does it work?
Yeah, so this variable only gets created at the point where we're at the detail record. But it is visible if you were to bounce around a bit, and I want to show you that in a moment.
Okay.
This essentially will only be relative to this detail section of the map. However, I do initialize it. I define it here at the header because I know if I encounter my next order, I do want to zero those out. So, and it all depends on your data, because if you look at your data here, this is one data file that contains multiple header records. This may have just contained one, which it would have been easier. But in the sense, I've got to be aware that this data contains multiple orders per file, so I need to prepare this map accordingly. So every time I get to my first header record, let me just zero out the variable so that when I get to the detail level, I can then start clean, and then at the summary level, apply that accordingly. So I'm going to run some data through, and that's going to help answer your question as well. So if you have your map open, you're welcome to also follow along. One thing that I want to do first in preparation is I'm going to go to the map menu and go to properties. And I'm going to go to the delivery tab. And I'm just going to confirm that global and wiki appear here. If not, you can use your drop down and you can grab them. I'm going to go backwards just real briefly here. Here's an EDI tab. This tab only appears when I'm creating X12, and it has some options here that you can configure to help create that X12, as in suppressing empty segments, taking illegal characters and substituting them if need be. This IntelliMap helps you generate X12 in the proper order per dictionary standard. So a lot of these are just set by default. And then under the general tab, there's some additional settings that can be used on a map per map basis. But in particular, I want to make sure that the diagnostics, both of these are checked, because that's going to give us visibility into this map run that I'm about to execute. So once you confirm this, go ahead and hit OK. And you can see as soon as I went into the properties, Delta considers that an edit, so you'll see that asterisk here. That's OK. But I want to run some data through this. So I'm going to go to the map menu. I'm going to go to test. So this allows you to choose your file to test with. So as a rule, what I try to do is under the project, I try to create a samples directory just to keep the associated data with the project itself. And here's that PO file we have open here. Go ahead and select that. You can double click, hit open, and the map's going to execute. And you're going to get some results that pop up immediately. But before we look at the results, I'm going to minimize that. And let's look down here. You should be at the Output Files tab by default. And what this does is look, it reads in, let me move this around. It reads in these configurations, again, because it integrates with the Trading Partner Manager and with the Management Console. So had this been in production, it's telling you that the resulting file would have been passed to this channel, our file output channel. The destination is simply the name or the file location that it lands at. You can see test 2, that 2 being that batch ID. And then the subject, and we'll look at that later, is multiple purchases order. That subject's actually configurable for more complex solutions. You can make that configurable. And then here's your description, and you actually have a series of other hidden columns here that you can play with, just so that you're aware. A lot of people don't even know this is here. But you can see here, it's been assigned this envelope control number, group control number, message control number, all at one. ECS Delta won't waste control numbers. So you'll see the same number here over and over again. It only applies these when the data is actually created in production. So some people are concerned about that, but you don't have to be. I'm then going to go right to the Diagnostics tab. And if at any point you lose any of this, just go do a map test, or in fact, once you've done your map test once, Delta will recall where the location was that you pulled the data into. You can just use this little button here, and you can re-execute this over and over again. Again, I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to go to Diagnostics. And one thing I always point out, because a lot of people forget, is on the far right, always take your cursor and move that bar all the way up to the top, because you want to start at the top. Some people miss that, and they actually move. They miss some important information that's prior. But this gives you a nice view of how the execution occurred. You can see here is the location of the data that was processed. You can see we're now parsing the data, so we're at the first. Notice there's no rules here. No rules have been executed. We're simply parsing data. We have this record ID, we have this PO number, this PO date. These captions here are not inherent to the data. Those captions are, in fact, they correspond to what you captioned the model here to be. So you can change PO number to purchase order number if that works for you. That will update accordingly to this list. And then you can see if the model was correctly designed and actually corresponds to the data and the fields you see here, this will line up quite nicely. I've seen people make mistakes, and you'll start to see what looks like a PO number in the date field, or you might see something that's a date that's in what should be a string field, and then there's something up. A lot of the time with bad data is they didn't realize that maybe an address or something had an additional comma in it, and with that comma, it can break the map. So when defining your message type, sometimes it's important to define your strings and such, but that's just a little thing to look out for. So here, this is only parsing data. The data is now in memory. That's why you want lots of memory on these machines if you're doing a lot of translations. Once the data is in memory for the first record, then we begin to execute. I'm going to move here. We execute the rules that correspond with this data in memory. And as I walk down each rule, you can see above how the rule gets highlighted to correspond with the diagnostics below. So I can see here the values that I'm contributing to the target side. And these are as is. And we can go all the way through to rule 26. And now we're at the detail. So now we're walking through the part numbers, the quantities, the unit prices. We are then executing this set of rules. We're not so don't think that you don't execute rules numerically based on these numbers here. These just are reference. These are rule reference numbers. You actually execute these rules based on the source data that's been parsed at the time. So that's why this is referred to, delta is often referred to as a source-driven mapper. There are target-driven mappers, but delta is a source-driven mapper. And you can see as I begin to walk through, here is rule 30, where am I? 33. And rule 33 has taken the var total, which at the first sentence is 0. It's then taken the quantity and the unit price, multiplied that, and it's returned 625. So you can see how this value couldn't exist prior to this first execution, but it will exist up to the point where it gets updated on the second item. In fact, what we can do within the map to further make that point is I'm going to right click and toggle a conditional breakpoint. Now there are breakpoints which just automatically stop the map, but I always like to use these conditional ones. The conditional are orange. And that's going to stop the map only if this rule resolves to true, and it will halt here before this actual data executes. So I'm going to hit go back here to the top, and if for any reason you're in mid execution, you'll see this stop button lit up. Make sure that it's not lit up. Go again to test map. We're going to do a second run, and lots of things just opened up. So we just, again, if we go to diagnostics, we've executed our header rule. We've parsed in the header record. We've executed the rules associated with the header record. We've read in the first line item. We've executed the rules associated with that line item, but we've halted right here at the quantity, unit price, var total of rule 33. You can see above here another quick glance at data that was, and make sure you have a values column. Sometimes it's way off to the right. You can just pull that right in if you don't see it. You can see what's being set here, what's being written so far. So let's look at var total, quantity, and unit price. We know var total is a variable. So we're going to come down here. We're going to move over to the elements and variables field. And off to the far right, we have the variables that are represented here for this particular map. We have var total, which is at the moment 0, because we initialize it as 0 here at the header. And that's the only thing that we've done so far is read in that value. Quantity and unit price, however, are not a variable. They're actually coming from the source, the record, the detailed record. Those I can find here under the source elements. And this is a little tricky because this is all laid out alphabetically from top down. So you have to read this carefully. You have PO data dot PO header record dot, and then you have the B's, the C's, the F's, but then you jump to P's for PO detail records. So now we're in the detail section, which is here. And then it picks up again with the header records there. So all alphabetical, but you can see here that the quantity, if I select quantity here, its value currently for the first line item of the first order is 5. And then the unit price, then let's find the unit price. It in turn is $1.25. And var total is 0. I'm going to hit this one step button. This is step and logging. This is step, either one. And all I did is I moved my cursor down 1, which means it's executed this rule and now it's halted here. And you don't see this here because it's in the variable. It's not actually written yet. It's the variable is, think of that as just, you know, a virtual clipboard, virtual, it's just virtually referenced there to be written at some point, which is actually going to be written down here. But I do have access to visibility for that here. So if I go to var total now, you can see 625. So you can see how that's all executed step by step. And this is really great for troubleshooting. You come to a map, you have no idea what's going on. This is the first time you've seen the map. One of the first things I would do is make sure you have your diagnostics turned on so you could read through the map rules themselves and use these breakpoints and have some sample data available. Run this through Delta Studio and just start walking through. And once you have some visibility to all this data, it's going to help you understand what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this play button, and you'll notice this continues to stop every time I'm hit a detail record. It is going to stop. So I'm just going to run through this so you can see. And as I do that, you can see how all this information flashes. It just reinforces the point that we're parsing data, placing that data into memory, and then we eventually write it out. And then here, and this is interesting because we have a batch of data represented in the file. The result will be a batch of data. And in X12, what that means is you have one envelope which contains multiple transactions, and these transactions then represent those orders in those files. Now, you know, once you've manipulated this data, you feel like you've gotten to a point where you're ready to test, you do need to migrate this to the ECS environment. You need to install it, referred to as install it or deploying. And to do that, because at the moment, I don't know if I touched on this, this map and these models currently live on the file system of the server that's hosting Delta, and to specifically locate that information, you can double click here and you can see by default it will install under the C drive. A lot of people when installing might move this to a D drive, but this is the location where you will find these maps. So what we want to do is now promote this map so that it's accessible in ECS. So I'm going to go to the tools, excuse me, I'm going to go to make sure I'm on the map itself. I will then have the map menu. Click on map and go to install. And you'll find the name of the server, the ECS server, which also is the same server that Delta's installed on, which is students, going to be the same for all of you guys. Click here, and it'll confirm, do you actually want to promote the map and models? And you want to say yes, and you should have a success, and then hit OK. One way to confirm visually that this map is now promoted is you can go to the tools menu and you can go to the map organizer. If you click on that, you will see all the maps. This is now reading from the ECS database, so you know that this map is there. You can see it's the only one here. And the nice thing about it is it carries the representation of these file directories here. They represent the same ones here, so it's real easy to line them up and recognize what map you're working with. Some people might dump all their maps into one big directory, and that can be a little tedious to work through, so I always recommend organizing yourself in such a way that things are easy to reference later on.
Hey, Mark,
Yep.
I'm sorry, what do we need to install?
Yeah, I'm going to close this. So make sure you go to your map, go to the map menu, go to install, and you should have student, and then you'll get some prompts. Just hit yes and OK.
But why we need to do that? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, what was it? You want to know what we're doing? What we need to do?
No, why we need to install? I mean, clicking install. What's for? I'm sorry.
Oh yes, what that does is that promotes the map from your local file system to the ECS database, because we're about to go. Yeah, we're about to go to the management console now in order to apply that map.
Okay, I see. All right, thank you.
All right. Sure. So now let's do that. Let's go here to the management console. And let's prepare the environment. We already have a file output channel. I'm sorry. I do this all the time. Make sure you're under the input channels. Go to the file directory and make sure you have whatever you named it. Doesn't matter as long as it points to this directory. I'm going to do one check here. Yeah, we have it already set up to go. Let's do this. If you're following along with me, let's go ahead and execute this channel as it's set now. Right click on the channel and just run now. And you get a little prompt, go ahead and hit OK. Let's see what just occurred, how that was logged. So we can go again on this channel, at this channel level, right click and go to view session logs. Now, if you don't have anything logged here, that simply means that the option to always log wasn't set. That's okay. I just want to point out that this is available, and this is the kind of information you get. If this were an FTP server, you'd see yourself logging in, you'd see your password being validated, changing directories, pulling in a file. You can see that this is sort of the data file representation of that. So let's now look at an additional tool that's used in Tandem. This is probably going to be the tool you're in most of the time. Once you've set these channels in the management console, you rarely have to come back here. But what you want to do is go ahead and open up the data administrator. So you can go up to Tools and click on Data Administrator. And this is the tool that's going to represent, this is going to show, this is going to display all the representations of the routing, of the channel retrieval, channel delivery, and map execution. So I just want to point out a couple things here. Very simple columns here. We have created the timestamp. This is the moment that the data was assigned a timestamp within the database. So we got it. Here's your source channel. This is nice because not only is it sortable, but it's filterable. So you can see only that data on this channel. Here's your title. That title can vary. It's coming straight from the MIME header. In fact, if you right click here and go to properties, you're going to see general tab, attributes, and these are your sessions. If you go to attributes, you can see how the file name is represented here. We're just capturing that here. We have our content type. It says it's X12, but it's actually not X12. That's a setting we can adjust later, but it will give you the size. Status no deliveries. The only other one thing I want to point out too is scroll all the way to the right. Here's your batch ID. ECS dynamically sets this in the database. This ID is searchable. You can even receive alerts to data that's failed, and it'll come with the batch ID, and you can then search on that batch ID. So a lot of the times I will grab this column and I'll move it way over here so that I have a better visibility on that batch ID. I just want to make sure that you realize it's off here to the right. But as far as deliveries, nothing's happened. We didn't do anything with the data. We simply received it within the database. Nothing occurred. So let's make something happen to this data next. So let's go ahead and we'll minimize the data administrator. We'll go back into the file input channel. I'm going to go to the content type, and I know it's only a data file, so I'm going to go back and choose this option, look up type using the file extension. I'm going to hit OK. I am going to though want to assign the map that we just installed to this. So let's go back into the channel. And let's go to the event rule tab. And I'm going to create a new event rule. The first thing that's selected, it's always at the top, is translate using liaison delta. There is a transform using Contivo. That's a different product for legacy users. You're always going to use delta. I'm going to hit OK. And using this drop down, you can now find, at a glance here, you can see the map you just installed. The second option here, on arrival of duplicate data, let's use the drop down and say choose always translate duplicate data. That will allow us to rerun this over and over again without any errors. And then we're just going to go to the event tab. And Delta tries to be helpful by setting these default names, but they're often way too long. So just go ahead and it's going to bark at you if you hit OK. So it just backspace here. So you remove those ellipses, those 3 points. And we don't have to worry about the name that much right now. I just want to make sure you're able to see the data route and hit OK. You can see where the event is created. It's assigned to the file input channel. You can see even we've moved down here as a visual reference. We've created an event, translation event. Under the events rules, when we hit OK here, we then now have this nice little process hierarchy where we have the channel where the data comes in, and then the translation event that occurs on the data that comes in from that channel. Now you can have multiple events occurring for the data that comes in on that channel, because you may want to translate it and then you may want to move it. You may want to set an alert upon receipt of it. So lots of different things you can do by chaining these events to a channel, or chaining events to events. So you can execute an event, and then upon completion of the event, then execute the next step, and so on and so on. So a lot of complexity that you can build in here. So now let's go back to the data administrator, and you'll see that icon here. It looks like a little database there. And let's see if we can take this, highlight it, right click, and go ahead and restage it. It's going to ask, are you sure you want to restage this batch? By restaging, you make batches appear newly arrived. You want to hit yes. Now the refresh is a little slow, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh here, refresh button. So what occurred is let's walk through this from top down. According to this, the clock on this machine, at 8:33 p.m., data arrived, which is true. Let's jump down then to the actual translation event. The translation event actually didn't occur until 8:40. Translation event occurred using Delta under this map, and the mapping was successful. There was a resulting piece of data from that, and if you go over here to the conversation tab, you can see that we did receive a piece of data, but we also translated and generated a new piece of data here. So to see that piece of data, we're going to go to this entry. And if you double click here, you can see the resulting translation and what occurred upon receipt of that order. Now there's various properties. If you go back to the deliveries tab, you can select any one of these. Right click, go to properties. You can get a sense of, the time and measures of the particular execution. You can go to the properties related to the transaction itself, glean information about header information, any session logging that might occur. You can double click on either one of these and open up in a representation of that data. Now, see how powerful this is, because I mislabeled this as X12, it's trying to open this data file in Notepad, and it's complaining. It's saying this is not X12. What I can do to work around that is I can right click and say open with text editor, and it's going to use Notepad by default. So I have, from my data administrator, I have access to the actual data then that I've received, data that I've translated. I can even go into the map itself, and I can create a session log for those translations, and I can actually show each step that occurred during the translation. And you may want to do that early on when you're creating your own maps. Let me do that real quick. I'm going to minimize here. I'm going to go to this area here under output channel, and there's translations, and here's Delta. This represents the translation engine that's being used, and I want to say always log a session. And then under the general tab, I'm going to say give me not only the details of the rules that were executed, but give me the logs. So I'm basically recreating what we just looked at in Delta as far as diagnostics. And so with these two chosen and with the always chosen, I can hit OK. So I've made a configuration change here in the management console. I can now go back to my data administrator. I can take my existing piece of data. It's already in the database. I can again right click, restage it, hit yes, do a refresh. And now you can see at 8:44, I have this new instance that executed. But this time I'm going to go down below to deliveries, double click, and oops, what do I want to do? Where's my I think it's want to go here. This is the output. So I'm sorry. If you go to the input channel, these are the results. So I'm going to go to the where I started, input channel, and my timestamp's a little wonky. I'm going to do this. So now you can see 8:44 here. So this is the delivery to Delta on this piece of data, and that corresponds with the resulting output at that time as well. Now I'll double click here, and you can see the session log. And this is the logging of this particular map execution. This is also really helpful in troubleshooting problems, trying to determine where a problem occurs and allowing you then to go to the next step. It may be bad data to begin with, so you're going to the trading partner and tell them something's wrong. It could be a bad function, a bad expression that would refer you back to your map. That means you need to take this piece of data and run it through your map and update the map. So you can go in reverse order now. We can take the data that's here, right click, and save as. And what that's doing is that's essentially exporting the data out of the ECS database, and it's recombining it and allowing you, I'm going to just dump it on my desktop, allowing you to create a separate instance of that file. So then if I go to my desktop, it's my little button here. I'll just do this. I have my export. Let me close this. Here's my export. So I can actually pull this data out of the database. Now I would take this, assuming this is a brand new piece of data I've never seen before, it just doesn't work with the map I have. I can go to my map. I can go to map test, point to this new piece of data, which I have on my desktop, export.txt, run it through again, set my breakpoints, go step by step until I find where the problem is, diagnose the problem, make my changes to the map, test again. Once I get good data, then I do need to take that map and reinstall it, because I've made a configuration change to a file on my desktop. I need to now promote that to the ECS database so that I can return to the ECS environment and I can restage this batch once again, and on and on and on. One other thing here just to point out is I'm taking the same batch 1002 and I'm restaging it, rerunning it through the process 3 times. You can see here, you can see where it's incremented batch. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this piece of data, I'm going to right click and I'm going to copy to a new batch. So what I'm doing here is I'm making a duplicate of this record that's in the database. I'm going to make a duplicate of it. I'm basically making a copy of this data. Then I'm going to rerun it through. Now, the benefit of doing this is you have this edit data button now. And I'm not going to do that because, again, it thinks it's the wrong type, but I'm going to do edit with Notepad. But here I'm looking at a temporary file representing the data that I just duplicated. And I can go in here and I can make changes. I can tweak things. I can take basketballs and maybe this should have been footballs. Maybe this is the wrong PO number. Maybe this is the wrong unit of measure. Anything that I need to do in order to compensate for bad data on the partner side, I can make a change here. This is really powerful for testing. So this allows you to tweak the data in order to get your maps up and running rather than having to wait for your trading partner to fix the data, resend, fix the data, resend. Out of frustration, a lot of times, a lot of people will go ahead and make these little tweaks on their own. And that's an internal decision where you can just, you decide if you're authorized to do that. Depends on the sensitivity of the data itself, but I'm just letting you know that the ability is there. So once I make those changes, close the file editor, go ahead and hit save. This again represents a copy of what I taken. I'm going to hit OK. And it says, yes, I've copied. And I'm going to do refresh. So I'm going to do this so I'm sorting correctly. So now you can see here at 8:51, I made a duplicate. Here's my new batch ID, got a whole new batch ID. It's a brand new, as far as ECS is concerned, it's a brand new unique file. Then it passed it, delivered to ECS, to Delta, where it executed, delivered. Double click here, purchase order. And you can see, what did I do? I think I said footballs here. But yeah, the data that I'm able to make those kinds of tweaks and changes and rerun them as such. As far as the output channel is concerned, I'm going to go here and reference my output channel. Everything that executed was dropped here, so I'm going to copy that, paste it. And you can see here, every time I've rerun this data, I've rerun it over and over again. It's been rewriting to test 2. And you can see how I basically concatenated everything to test 2 over and over and over again. I locked myself down because I hard-coded that name. So now I'm going to go to the Trading Partner Manager. And let's see, where did I do that there? Instead of test 2, I'm going to go, let's do 850. That's hard-coded, underscore batch dash ID. So in changing that configuration for those transactions meant for WikiToys, I have impacted configuration and the process here. So I can go ahead and take this guy again, copy to a new batch. Here's my new set. You can see my new set of batch IDs. And click down below, you can see my destination now for the resulting output of the map is 850_1009, which corresponds exactly to that batch ID. I do use this all the time to create unique file names, so I incorporate that batch ID all the time. So that was basically a high level demonstration of how all these pieces interact with each other, how to set up a basic process. Um, and so when Wednesday, what we'll do is when we'll come back, we'll look at mapping a little more specifically. We'll go through an exercise where you'll create what it feels like to create these models, create the map, see if we can actually rebuild this map from scratch, see what that feels like, and then touch on various features and such in here as we do that. So that'll be for Wednesday. Is there any questions here for what we've talked about? Anything that reminds you of something that you want to talk about in your own environment?
Yeah. Two questions. Is there any kind of version management in Delta or not?
There is, and that would be a good thing for Friday is to look
Okay.
look on your side and see if you are using the solution manager. If you're not, we can talk about how that can be implemented. If you are, we'll talk about how it's being used there. But yes, there is the
Okay.
ability to do that. Yeah, good question.
Okay. And the other question is, I previously in another position worked with Bistalk, which will be kind of another translator, and it had an option to kind of debug the files from directly from production while it was being processed on the thread. It was being processed on the maps were running, and you catch the process, and there you can debug without having to take the file and everything. I guess there is not something like that on Delta.
No, no. In that case, that sounds like that's more integrated than
Okay.
Delta and ECS. Yeah, it's separate. The only thing is what we went through is being able to, first view the session log here. So you really can't halt this. What you would have to do, yes, is go through here, and of course you could then set your breakpoints accordingly and do that dynamic troubleshooting at this level. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and close up for today, and we'll meet again Wednesday at the same time, and we'll look at translations. And yeah, feel free to email me if there's something else you want to look at Wednesday, and I can incorporate that into that session. All right, well, have a good evening, and thank you for your time.
You too.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank
Hey,
you, guys.
Mark,
Thank you.
Yes.
have you ever worked with Lisbeth Avila from Lear?
Elizabeth Avila
Aha,
from where?
Lear Corporation.
Maybe. I don't
You sound
recall.
familiar to me. I don't know why. I was working with her, but you sound very familiar. I
Oh,
don't know if from Lear Corporation or from Lazy Boy.
no, no. I've been well. I was with SoftShare, and then I was with Liaison, and now I'm with OpenText. So I've been around for a long time. So we may have talked at some point.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah,
there's maybe, yeah. All right. Well,
All
good to
right.
see you again.
No, see you later.
All right. Bye bye.
All right.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.